Welcome to the Oversubscribed podcast. We bring you a weekly hit of the topics that are important to women with a bit of fun on the side. I'm Alana.
And I'm Laura. Season 5 is brought to you by Breast Cancer Trials, saving lives for more than 40 years through clinical trials research. Their researchers are working on finding new and better treatments and prevention strategies for breast cancer that saves lives today, tomorrow and forever. Learn more about how you can support their groundbreaking research at breastcancertrials.org.au. Hello, Alana. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm pretty excited about this episode. But before we start, let's talk recommendations. What have you got for me today, Alana?
Yeah, it's a new podcast. It's called Chameleon Hollywood Con Queen.
Oh.
I'll read you the little intro that the podcast has in its show notes.
Okay.
It goes, for the past 6 years, someone or some group has been terrorizing a certain class of Hollywood workers.
Oh.
This is the incredible true story of one of the longest and strangest cons in history.
Oh.
So basically these people, typically personal trainers, makeup artists, stylists and the like, are offered what they think are exciting Hollywood opportunities that send them overseas. But when they get there, the reality is much different. And I won't say anything more than that, but recommend that you tune in.
Oh, yes. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
I love a bit of a mystery.
Me too.
Yes, I shall tune in. To my recommendation this week, it's actually the My Octopus Teacher on Netflix. And I was kind of late to this one because everyone's watched it, apparently. But I found it very enjoyable. It was really emotional. And it was kind of a bit weird also, but in a good way. Anyway, I'll quickly explain the concept. So it's all about this South African documentary filmmaker called Craig Foster, who lives with his family in the most amazing spot on the Cape Peninsula. And this feature-length documentary starts with him recounting a period of his life where he's lost his way, struggled with depression, and he decides to reconnect with the ocean near his home, which he loved as a child, and he just starts swimming and free diving every day. And he's amazing swimming. He can hold his breath for a minute or a minute. I mean, more like 4 minutes or something at a time. He starts noticing the surrounds. He begins to feel a bit better. He starts bringing his camera underwater with him. And shortly thereafter, he meets this beautiful, highly intelligent little octopus, and they develop a mutual fascination. And this kind of incredibly amazing but also weird relationship begins. It's all captured on film. As a documentary maker, the underwater footage is amazing. If you like that kind of David Attenborough, nature doco, it's worth watching just for that. Craig's this kind of softly spoken dude, and he seems like a very caring, decent human. It's this very gentle documentary. Wow. Could work for older kids too, but a little bit of a warning, you won't want to eat calamari afterwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad I'm vegetarian sometimes. Yes. But I'm curious, does the octopus know he's in a relationship with this documentary filmmaker?
Yes, he becomes like his little pet. It's really interesting. Yeah, they're very smart.
Bizarre. I might watch it. I've heard of it. I'm quite sure.
Get the kids into it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll see. It could be educational.
Yeah.
Now to what's made my week. I had something planned, but now it's going to be what's made my day.
Oh.
The Australian state of Victoria. All its COVID restrictions, or most of the COVID restrictions have been eased. They have more freedom. And I almost was a little bit misty-eyed this afternoon thinking, oh, my gosh, these people have had some of the harshest restrictions in the world and now they're almost free. And I just felt really happy for them and happy that we as a country have done well through COVID, through this whole pandemic. And so, yay for Victoria. And I know we have a lot of listeners in Victoria, and Laura and I are very happy for you.
Oh, aren't we? It's amazing. Great news.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, really great news.
But to what's made my week was Book Week. It was last week, and our school live streamed the Book Week parade and even had a camera on top of one of the buildings, and I could see all the kids. It was great. And my youngest was Cat in the Hat, so I just had to look for the big stripy hat. And there were a few of them actually, but I managed to find her. And I saw this funny meme on Facebook this week that said, how did we manage to lose everything this year, but somehow we still have Book Week? And I was like, yes. And I really got that. So usually I'm frantically running around trying to buy things for the kids, but they were happy to wear costumes we already had. So that was less pressure this time around as we're planning Halloween costumes for this coming weekend. So we can't wait for Halloween. But we've had a heap of rain on the east coast of Australia this week. So here's hoping hoping that Halloween goes ahead this Saturday afternoon.
Oh, yeah. I love Halloween. Love a bit of any excuse to dress up, as you know.
Yes.
When it comes to Book Week, I'm a little bit confused because Toby's was like in August. So I don't know if there's two. Anyway.
I think that's when it's meant to be.
Oh,
and
no, because a lot of kids were doing it this week, not just yours. So I don't know.
I know. I think Book Week is typically mid-year, but because of all the COVID stuff, I think a lot of them held back. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. So, to today's rather risque topic, Alana, let's talk about sex, baby. I can't. I'm sorry. I have to put that in there. But anyway, today we are talking about women's complicated history with sex right up to the modern day.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd start by kind of casting our minds back basically across the whole of history, relatively recently, where women have kind of been owned by men, sometimes literally. That was certainly true of the Romans and the Greeks, where according to an article I read on the UK's Independent newspaper, a woman caught in the act of adultery could be killed by her husband on the spot, while a wife who drank more than a moderate amount of wine gave grounds for divorce. So
I qualify.
Yeah, that's right. Oh dear. I feel like there might be some states in Middle America where this is still law, but I jest, of course. So during that time, the Romans and the Greeks, prostitution was rife and orgies certainly were a thing. So it wasn't all bad for all women. It's just that certain women did the sex and other women did the kind of child raising wifey stuff. And then kind of came God and Christianity, and then we were all kind of stuffed. There was, according to Ray Tannehill's book, which is mentioned in that article in The Independent, the book's called Sex and History. The years between 400 AD and 1000 AD saw Christian morality gain a grip on Western thought, so paralyzing that is only now beginning to relax.
Yeah, well, in some parts of the world, I guess. So, yeah, so that meant that all the fun stuff became sinful, right? This quote from the same article in The Independent made me laugh. It says, sex within marriage was tolerated for reproductive purposes only, and contraception banned because of its associations with pleasure. So it's like some man suddenly decided no pleasure allowed for you ladies.
No, that's it. So I guess we can really kind of blame the Old and the New Testament for a lot of our hang-ups around sex. I mean, if like me, you were brought up Catholic, it just makes a lot of sense. And I know it was confusing at school being taught about, Mary, mother of Jesus, and then there was Mary Magdalene, pretty much the only other interesting female character in the Bible, and she was a possible prostitute, or at least that's what we were taught in the 1980s. Yes. So women, you can be one or the other, not both, right? So for me, growing up, in this Catholic school system, a bit weird. Sex was officially taught as something sacred for procreation or prostitution, but certainly not just for fun, But this also, in reality, was the late 80s, early 90s, when popular culture had been changing for a little while, So I did know really that this wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back to magazines in the UK like Cosmopolitan or More, and books like Forever by Judy Blume. We've talked about that before. And chats with my friends, we knew that sex could be fun for women and for men. There was talk of pleasure. We knew it existed, but it still had this kind of little shameful tinge to it,
Yeah.
What magazines, books and sex ed did you have here, Alana?
Yeah, well, sex ed started in year 5 for us. So we were aged around 10 or 11. It was fine, slightly awkward. I think I had, learned a bit of it anyway through this popular book that we had when we were kids called Where Did I Come From? So
same.
So a bit got a bit of knowledge there, but and I picked up a lot of info thanks to Dolly magazine, which is no longer around, like many magazines. Dolly Doctor was the health section where girls wrote in with very specific personal questions, sometimes relating to sex, but not always. So that was always a good source of info. And then as a teenager in the 90s in Australia, we moved on to Clio or Cosmo magazines, which did a sealed section once or twice a year.
Love those.
And those sections certainly shed more light on the topic of sex. And it seems so cute now to have a sealed section when it's just open slather on the internet, but they did provide an important service. And I think many young men also learned a lot from the sealed sections of teen girls magazines.
I bet they did. All the boyfriends and brothers would just be stealing them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Dolly and Cleo since, being in Australia for a number of years. And I kind of think it's sad, but not surprising that, they no longer exist. The same goes for this, similar titles in the UK. We had this hilarious magazine in the UK called More, and it was like the dirty one, and it had a position of the fortnight illustrated at the back for you to try out with your boyfriend. We used to flip straight to that page and just have a bit of a giggle, really. Thinking back, it was quite old-fashioned and presumptive that we were all straight. It was a man and a woman in a various cowboy or whatever that. I can't even remember.
Reverse cowboy.
Reverse cowgirl. I can't remember. Oh God, that shows how old I am.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there just was that assumption when we were growing up that we were all going to go into heterosexual relationships, wasn't there?
In those magazines. There was very little about
same-sex relationships.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So really most of what we learned then was from whispered chats with other girls at school. There was no Google to learn it from. It was all word of mouth, the sharing of those dog-eared copies of books and magazines that we've already mentioned. And now, porn, in terms of that back then was magazines and VHS tapes.
Yeah.
It was around, but the majority seemed to be made for and owned by men. I haven't conducted any official research here. This is just from my experience. A funny story, a boyfriend of mine at the time did actually gift me a VHS about how to have pleasurable sex. Lots of lacy curtains and cheesy references to lovemaking on the cover. It was very cheesy. I remember hiding.
And that's why he's an ex-boyfriend.
I was a lovely guy, but yes, it was.
Sorry.
But yes, no, absolutely. And I hid it under my bed, and it wasn't like I could just kind of pop it in the family VHS player when I was 17 years old and have a look at it. It's not, in those days you didn't have your own well, I didn't. I wasn't rich enough to have my own VHS player in my bedroom.
No.
I'm pretty sure actually my parents found it hidden under my bed. I have no idea what happened to it. Perhaps it's still left in the family collection. Heirloom. I think he actually got it from Anne Summers, which you may know. It's a UK kind of saucy undies shop that also sold vibrators and other cool kind of sexy stuff back before they were known as pleasure products, which are all now pastel and kind of pretty looking on Instagram. But I remember popping into Anne Summers to get some accessories for hens parties and buying various lacy undies. Totally different vibe in Australia when I first arrived. Lots of these kind of big sex shops, but they were very male and kind of scary looking. I wasn't really sure where to go to get my lacy thongs. But thankfully these days it's all online and much easier. But did you ever pop into a sex shop or Anne Summers even when you were in the UK?
Yeah. Oh, yes, when I lived in the UK. But back to the scary looking sex shops of Australia. Friends and I went to the Gold Coast in our early 20s and they were everywhere there. But they're really cheesy or they're quite dark and dingy and comical and the like. So, when I lived in London, I dropped into Anne Summers on Oxford Street and was like, oh, my God, this is different. And I saw in the window that they did, nice lingerie and that. And I was like, oh, yeah, cool, I'll check this out. And it's not till you go, obviously, further down the back of the shop and you see what everyone is clearly there for. So there were plenty of sex toys and it was a really well-lit shop. It felt really mainstream. And, I was just like, oh, wow, this isn't really done at home. It is kind of now with Honey Burdette and other retailers like that. But funnily enough, there's an Aussie journalist called Anne Summers, and that's who I thought of when I first saw the store. And interestingly, she writes on feminism, and that's probably pretty appropriate for this episode. One of her best-known books is called Damned Whores and God's Police, which was written in the late 70s. The intro in the book explains the time in which it was written, and it says, it was in this climate that Anne Summers identified damned whores and God's police, the stereotypes that characterise all women as either being virtuous mothers whose function was to civilise society, or bad girls who refused or were unable to conform to that norm and who were there thus spurned and rejected. These stereotypes persist to this day, argues Anne in the updated version of this classic book. So it's kind of goes back to what you said about the Bible. You've got Virgin or Mary, Mother of God, supposedly, or you've got the sex worker Mary Magdalene. There's no middle in between, women who just like to have sex with their husbands occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's brilliant. Yes. Funny, I saw Aussie Anne Summers talk here in Newcastle last year at the Newcastle Writers Festival event. She's lived a very interesting life and she's written, some brilliant books. But no, I don't think she was in any way connected to the Anne Summers lingerie shop chain in the UK, but it is an interesting coincidence. Yeah,
I wonder if she knows that's so Anne's book was written before we were born, but in recent times I don't think we can go past the TV show Sex and the City. I think it was a real awakening for young women who are, seeing other women talk about good sex lives and seeing that, on screen. And it certainly opened my eyes. It was 2001 when I first saw it. I was in a uni flat share house with my friends, Andrea and Manisha. They loved it. And I'm like hiding in the corner, red-faced and squealing because I had never seen women, maybe even men, speak so openly, I guess, about sex like that. And so now there are still those classic Sex and the City moments, like the rabbit vibrator episode, the tantric sex episode, and normalizing those things, I think, really encouraged some women to talk about it more. And some of those magazines that we spoke about, Cosmo and Cleo, used to have those quizzes like, are you a Charlotte? Well, if you are, you're really prudish. And, are you a Samantha? Well, then you're a hornbag, So it was really, I think those 4 personas have almost stood the test of time, or at least the past 2 decades. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I was utterly obsessed with the show. Although I always used to wonder why, apart from Samantha, they used to keep their bras on during sex. I found that quite interesting. It must have been some contractual agreement with the actresses, but who keeps their bra on during sex? Or is this something I just don't know?
Not me.
I guess if it's a pretty bra, maybe, but it was anyway. I digress. So yeah, Sex and the City actually began in 1998, and I was kind of aware of it. But back then I was at uni having fun. And again, we didn't have social media. So while it was like out there, I was in the UK watching a lot more UK TV at the time. I only truly became obsessed in 2002. And I remember watching like back-to-back episodes when I was engaged to Jules, now husband, living in this little apartment in Merriweather, thinking that these 4 women in their 30s were so sophisticated and cool. It felt sort of otherworldly. It's funny watching it back again now in the wake of, hashtag Me Too, and so many, there's been so many other brilliant kind of woke TV shows for women like The Bold Type and Girls, which I adore. And while it's still great, I think it has dated, and while it wasn't perfect, I think, as you said, as a young woman watching it, it was important to see other women discussing and just enjoying sex. Before we kind of get up to date where we are now in the world of women and sex, I have to quickly mention another kind of pop cultural phenomenon that got us talking, and that is 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. It was an ebook originally, became a New York Times bestseller in 2012, and then a massive movie franchise. Did you read that one, Alana?
No, I didn't. Yeah, it just didn't really interest me.
Look, fair enough. It wasn't really my bag either. I found that whole like dom submissive thing just not really, it just wasn't for me. But I think like everyone else, I wasn't really reading it for the intelligent writing either. I know she copped a bit of slack about that, but hats off to her, for her getting women talking and reading about sex. But all 50 Shades, it seems kind of tame in comparison to what we can find these days on the internet, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Since the advent of the internet, online porn sites have exploded, which is a rather apt description, I think. According to a recent NBC article, globally, porn is a $97 billion industry, according to Cassia Wasick, assistant professor of sociology at New Mexico State University. So compared with the old days of VHS porn being shared between teen boys, online porn sites such as Pornhub are very accessible, a bit scary and unregulated too.
Yeah, something I definitely worry about as a mum of 2 boys, that real, open access, and you have to be very careful. But I think that's, a separate issue, and it's something we talked about in more detail in season 2, if you want to go back and have a listen to that. But for me and for women generally, I think it's interesting that women are beginning to carve out our corners of this kind of online space for ourselves. Yeah. There's a quote from a 2016 BBC article about female desire that I think sums it up. And it says, though women have always been involved in the porn industry until the 1980s, porn was largely geared towards a male audience. When home videos became available, however, porn previously only shown in theatres became more easily accessible to women as well as men. Picking up on this, female directors began creating porn marketed towards women, which often took a softer approach with storylines lacking in violence, for instance. Now, it's funny because I was recently talking about this with some friends, and a female-friendly porn or erotica, it's definitely becoming more mainstream, and it's having a bit of a moment, I think. Personally, I subscribe to something called Frolic Me, which is an online site with saucy content created by and for women. And I've interviewed the founder of that site, Anna Richards. And, if the mood takes me, I prefer to know that I'm watching something or listening to something where the women have been paid well and given consent. It's like, it's important kind of feminist porn. I love it. Um, and while I'm on this topic, I recently downloaded an app called Dipsy. It's audio only. I've got it on my phone. It's also filled with kind of saucy content to listen to. And and women are supposedly, more responsive with just audio. We don't necessarily need to look at the visuals. So if you feel a bit embarrassed or you don't want to quite watch any porn, I recommend Dipsy. Give it a whirl. See how you go.
Yeah, so porn and pop culture references aside, the reason we are starting to see more pleasure products targeting us is because more research has been done into our sexuality. This quote from a BBC article explains what has changed. For decades, researchers bought into society's belief that men have higher desire than women. Since large studies consistently confirmed that finding in the past, but more recent evidence reveals that differences between the sexes may actually be more nuanced or even non-existent depending on how you define an attempt to measure desire. Then there's the British singer Lily Allen, who timed the release of a certain product perfectly well for this episode. Actually, she's released a vibrator last week in partnership with a company called Womanizer. Lily's quoted as saying, "Loving yourself should be the most normal thing in the world. We all deserve amazing orgasms, right?"
Right on.
Aussie Bachelor in Paradise star Jessica Brody is one of the influencers who's promoting that product here in Australia. And I'll put a link to an article in the show notes where Lily speaks really honestly and says she'd given birth to 2 children before she'd had her first orgasm. So
I know.
Lily's very open in most things, but particularly this article. So I'll pop that in there.
Great. Yeah, I have to read that. I haven't read that one, but I couldn't believe she had an orgasm until 29. That's a lot of wasted years.
Yeah.
But on that very issue, I also found this recent ABC Life story, and it's really interesting about how new research shows women get bored more easily than men, which is kind of the opposite to what people have traditionally thought.
Yeah.
Here's a quote. It says, there have been at least 6 longitudinal studies, in total tens of thousands of adults in a range of ages from 18 to 70, which have showed consistently that in long-term, committed, exclusive relationships, women stop wanting to have sex in years 1 to 4. But men in these long-term exclusive relationships are pretty happy having sex with their long-term partners for 9 or 12 years without reporting boredom. Wow. And Martin says it's not because women want less sex. They need variety, novelty, and adventure. Otherwise, they get bored. So there you go. The research says it all. Don't want to get bored, ladies.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness. And on this very topic, and before we introduce our special guest for today, Emma Sayle, I have to kind of mention how I first came across Emma, which resulted in me going to a sex party in Sydney.
Okay, go on.
Yes, sorry, guys. So Emma, she's actually a contact of an old school friend of mine and the owner and founder of Killing Kittens, which is a global sex-positive community for women that includes running virtual and real-life sex parties. Now, I interviewed her for a Sunday Life article, and then I went along to their very first Australian sex party in Sydney in 2015, and I wrote about that experience for Mamma Mia. Now, it was rather eye-opening, I can tell you. I saw a lot of flesh. And I'll put the link to that story in the show notes so that you can have a read and read all those juicy details in your own time. But it certainly put a little bit of spice into our sex life for some time,
Excellent.
But anyway, I'll let you introduce today's special guest, Alana.
Yes, Emma Sayle is the founder and CEO of Killing Kittens, Safe Date, Sister and the Sisterhood. Since launching Killing Kittens in 2005, the company has grown into a fierce army of over 160,000 sexually liberated people around the world. Regular events are hosted in venues from London to New York, Venice to Sydney, on top of a global online community platform. Global press regularly pronounces Emma a leader in female sexual liberation and empowerment. Welcome to Oversubscribed, Emma.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
So I just wanted to start by asking you if you could tell us why you started Killing Kittens in the first place.
Long story.
Do tell.
Do you know, in a nutshell, I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up going to all-girls boarding school in England and had a real mismatch of messages of sort of women know your place on one hand, but then women can do whatever you want and go out and rule the world on the other hand. And there was always this fire. I say there was this fire in my belly that just kept being stoked and seeing the unbalance when between women and men in out in the real world, but very much so in my early 20s, when obviously you're out and about and you're dating and everyone else, you know, around you, all your friends are dating, and just that really hit home, that how unbalanced it was, and how if men slept around, they were an absolute legend and they got high-fived, and what guy, and if women did, the slut shaming and the guilt. And, you know, and I would, you know, I'd go out on dates and you'd, you know, snog a guy, and then you might do a bit more. And just looking back at it, and you kind of, I'd stop myself sleeping with people, because, you know, as long as you didn't actually, you know, have actual sex with them, then you could actually, your conscience could accept that, and that was allowed. And I look back at it and go, that's just ridiculous. When I think about it like that. And I just, it was so imbalanced, and it just I got really angry, and I'd had, you know, guy friends around me saying that they'd met really lovely girls, but they weren't girlfriend material. And it'd be like, well, why aren't they girlfriend material? Oh, because they've slept with loads of people. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And at the time, it was sort of 2005, I was about 24, 25, and Sex and the City had come out. So suddenly you got a group of girls on TV talking about vibrators and sex lives, and there was a bit of a buzz around women's sexuality. And Lalo, the sex toy, went into one of, you know, our big department stores in London, and Summers, who, you know, a big chain of shops now, suddenly hit the high street as the first kind of shops out on the high street selling all this stuff. And so this was going on, and I was doing PR for the Erotica show, which is a big kind of erotic trade and consumer show in London, and all weird and wonderful, amazing people in the adult world. But I suddenly realized it was all men running businesses, from lingerie to sex toys, claiming to be for women, but it was all men running it. And I just, basically wanted to launch a safe space for women and girls to be able to explore their sexuality without any judgment, online and offline. And so that's kind of how it started. I mean, the name I came up with came after 3 nights of not sleeping in Ibiza at a wedding out there. So I'm doing it was, I was in Ibiza and hadn't slept for 3 days, and went, right, that's it, I've had enough. I want to create this world. And I look back at it, and actually I think I was so insecure myself, and actually a lot of people assume I was out there just shagging around, and that's why I could possibly launch something that involved people having sex at parties and things. And I look, but actually it was what I wanted to create. It's what I wanted to be able to do, but couldn't do myself. I wish I'd had that confidence to be able to not give a shit in my 20s and explore sexually. So, and all my friends were like that. So it was very much kind of, actually there was a big part of me wanting to create a world that kind of a bit of a fantasy world where that I would want to be, you know, my alter ego was part of. So that 15 years ago, that's where it
came from. Yeah. And just what are the rules? There's some rules around joining Killing Kittens. Can you explain those to me?
So the main rules are that men can't approach women they don't know. They have to wait for the women to do the approaching. Right. And that now, because we're considered a tech business now, for the past 4 years we've been, so it kind of, the rules are in the offline parties and events, but also across the website and the social network and dating site, that's all intermingled at the moment. So men you can like someone. So in your profile, a bit like sort of a Facebook bum meets Bumble, you'll see that someone likes you, but no one can send you messages until you've actually connected, done the connection first. Yeah,
so it's female led. And at the parties, are single men allowed, or it's just women, isn't it, and couples? Is that right?
It's basically every man has to be accompanied by a woman, so that's a genuine couple or not. But we do, for the past 3-4 years, we have been doing singles parties, so where we do let in a certain amount of single men, but they have to be, so everyone that comes to the events have to be members, so you have to apply online, register online, and then be party approved, and then you can come. But only women can actually be members of the Kittens Association, which is the part that enables you to come to the full-on Killing Kittens events.
Yeah. And so in your experience, and I guess from feedback from women that have been a member for a number of years, what do you think the women love most about the Killing Kittens parties and the broader community that you've created online and in real life? What do they love most?
The biggest thing, and we get feedback every day, and also now, with the new site, everyone has to put reasons for joining. And the biggest feedback we get is that I know that, everyone, I think the word empowered is so overused, but it is that it's actually, they feel completely empowered to be themselves with no judgment. And we get groups of women coming down now, and they just love dancing around in their underwear at the events. They don't want to do anything else, and they go, that's enough. It just gives them that confidence, and the control back to them. And you're dealing, there's a lot of women out there for, it's extraordinary how many relationships are, controlling. That the women's put down. They might be really lovely guys out and about, but they just can't handle, a woman who makes them feel a bit threatened because they're doing well in their career, or, and it's surprising how many couples you meet like that. So a lot of women are kind of getting the power back, so that to find themselves and their identity and actually have that confidence. Again, so that's the feedback we get pretty much daily.
I went to one of the Killing Kittens parties in Sydney and had a very interesting, lovely time. And I spoke to a number of people, couples and singles, and a lot of the women said that I guess they were interested in exploring their sexuality as well. Is that something that that other feedback that you get about it?
Yeah, so that's a big part of it. And that was one of the, that's the big core of why it was launched, is that I always said back then, and people would be like, no, it's not true that women are naturally bisexual. It's that we are bicurious. We, the sexuality scale, women are very 3, 4, 5, and that's kind of scientifically backed. And actually, we check out women faster than guys check out women. We're very much, about aesthetics. We're more touchy feeling. And actually what we find is exactly that. So actually, the more society is kind of changed and adapted, and it's become a bit more acceptable now, the whole sexuality spectrum is like massive. Actually, there's loads of women in supposedly straight couples and marriages and partnerships who are now coming out going, well, actually, we've always had this thing in us of being attracted to women. We like being the husband. We, are happily married, but there is that part. And there's a lot of women that are, they are bisexual, bi-curious. And so we do get a lot of couples and a lot of women coming down, because that's the part they want to explore in a safe space. Because actually, where would you go? Even if you went to sort of lesbian bars, there is that part that actually a lot of, the lesbian scene, they're better. It's way better now, but kind of they feel they treat you like a bit of an imposter. And actually, you're kind of disrespecting them when you go going in kind of going, well, I just want to try it. You know what I mean? It's like kind of going, well, we've got feelings. Yeah. And actually you get these women coming in who just want to sort of try something with us. Yeah. So there's a huge part of events around that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what do you think are some of the other sort of common misconceptions around female sexuality generally?
It's got a bit better, but there is that and I remember when I first launched, is that, that preconception that if women have one night stand and they're not happy, you know what I mean? They're just, there's something wrong with them, and they're just having sex, they've got no respect for themselves, and they're just sort of emotionally damaged, who are trying to get, highs. And actually the opposite is true most of the time. You're always going to get people on both sides. But, most of the girls I know who, especially like now in the 20-year-olds who just don't care. And they're so free, and because they don't have the same judgment we had, 20 years ago, on that front, they just go, well, feel like having sex. We want to have sex. It's our choice to have sex. It's our choice to go out. And if we feel like sleeping with a woman, we will. And the next night, if we feel like sleeping with a man, we will. And they're not doing it to try and get, to fix something in them. So there is, and I still hear it now, there's this massive kind of thought that any woman that's possibly remotely, sex, like liberal in the bedroom, and when it comes to sex, must be damaged. when to me it's the complete opposite.
No, not true. That's right. I agree. We talked about that a little bit in this episode, that there for many years has been a kind of misconception that women don't like sex. It's all, it's doing it for the man or what have you. And it's, lots more research is showing that's not the case. Women love sex just as much as men do in many cases. Yeah. You've already achieved so much. And what is next for you, for Killing Kittens, and for your whole, brand, We Are KK? What's next? Empire. That's right.
Do you know, well, with KK, to be honest, we've just launched this summer a whole new tech platform that we've spent 3 years building, and we've got a kind of more advanced chat app, more advanced than WhatsApp kind of chat app that is all ready to go. We've been testing it the last 3 weeks. We've just it's in like your beta stores and Apple, in iOS and Android and Google.
Wow.
And we're just waiting because they're arses really, and they want you to jump through so many. So it was meant to go live at the end of last week, and we've got to tweak a few things, and they want all your money. So that chat app, and you've got big group chat on there and video chat and stuff. So that'll be really exciting. And the other thing we're doing is actually white labeling all the tech we've got with other setups who don't have online communities. So it kind of, the tech side of it is a massive machine. So that we're expanding at pace. And actually what we built is the first kind of adult social network platform. So to us, the big push behind us is kind of normalizing the conversations around sex, so that actually it is perfectly normal. People should be able to talk about sex the same way they talk about new diet plans and new exercise plans they've read about in this. I've just read about this new position, or I've got this new toy. It's sort of, our sexuality drives us more than anything. So to me, I just don't, that stigma and shame that there, especially amongst women, just needs to go, and is kind of at the core of what we do to open up as many people as possible. So the education side, we do more workshops and webinars event-wise than we do the full-on KK events now, especially the last 6 months when everything's digital.
Yes.
So everything at the moment is webinars.
Will that all be available in Australia?
Yeah, so it's global. So so if members if you go onto our website now, it's all the new platform is on there, and hopefully by the time this comes out, the app will be there. So it is global. I think China's the only one we're not allowed. We had to take off the list last week. But other than that, it's global. And
fantastic. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes to where people can find out more about Killing Kittens and where they can download and talk about sex more openly. We love it. Thank you so much, Emma. Thanks for joining us today.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to our Season 5 partner, Breast Cancer Trials. There are a number of ways that you can support their world-first research, such as participating in the BRCA-P clinical trial, donating to the trial, or sharing this game-changing research on social media. So to find out more and support the researchers of Breast Cancer Trials, visit breastsolution.com.au.
Thanks for listening. If you like the episode, share it with a friend or leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook.